Here's how to get a deal if you're looking to buy a house anytime soon. Now that interest rates have risen, buyer demand has slowed, properties are sitting on the market longer, and we're starting to see price drops across the board in many markets out there. But how do you know which property sellers are willing to take an offer below the asking price? How do you know if they're willing to deal? In today's video, I want to walk you through the process of looking for deals in this crazy real estate market. There's a lot of properties out there currently sitting on the market where sellers are saying, I'm not willing to accept anything below the asking price. And then a couple of weeks later, you see the property sell for a price that you are willing to pay. So how do you find out in advance, maybe up front, if the seller was willing to play ball? Well, I want to take some time and tell you what to look for if you're trying to find a deal in this market. Which properties are most likely to work with you versus which properties aren't likely to work with you. And I want to start today's video by talking about two things. Remember, all real estate is local. So depending on where you are in the country, you might be able to get a better deal than some other parts of the country. If you were in one of these markets that exploded over the last couple of years, Austin, Boise, Nashville, any of these markets, you might be able to get a bigger deal than, say, an Orange County market, which is where I'm located. And the second thing I want to talk about is, what is an actual deal? Well, it's relative to each person. Some people out there might say a deal is getting a property 2-3% below the asking price, whereas another person out there might say that you need to get it 10-15% below the asking price in order for it to be a deal. So a deal is relative depending on what you're looking for, but the questions that we're going to talk about today, what to look for in a deal, will help you get to the finish line regardless of what you're actually considering a deal. Now, before we dive into the questions that I want you to start asking about these different types of properties, is we need to find out the seller's motivation if we can. Now, how would we do that? Well, one way is by calling the listing agent up yourself. As a buyer, you might actually call the listing agent and try to have a conversation. Try to talk to the agent to find out why that person is selling the property. Are they moving? Did they get a job relocation? Did they build another property and they're looking to sell this property? Are they looking to maybe move their family because of one of the 3 Ds in selling? Death, divorce, and debt. All 3 of those things give the seller a lot of motivation to sell a property. If there's been a death in the family and it's been left to family members, as an inheritance, or maybe it's a trust sale, or maybe some cases it's a probate sale, there might be more on the line, more reason for the seller to want to get rid of that property. And that's something that could help you in tailoring an offer to get a deal. The next thing might be divorce. And if you go into a property and the agent's just, telling you everything about the family situation, it's a divorce, she's moved out, he's looking to move, he needs to find a property quickly, it's really bad. This is another opportunity for you to possibly get a deal. And the last one is debt. If for some reason that property is in distress, the seller's having financial hardship because maybe the listing agent told you, maybe you know it from a neighbor or a friend or whatever, that's another opportunity for you to possibly get a deal on that property. So knowing the seller motivation isn't always easy, but it's definitely worth taking the time to try to figure it out. Now, it's not always going to work in your favor. Sometimes there's one of those 3 Ds, the death, the divorce, the debt, and the seller isn't willing to budge for whatever reason. So each case is going to be a little bit different, but that's where we start talking about some of the other things that you need to start asking yourself to try to figure out if you can actually get a deal on one of these properties. Now, the first thing I want you to look at in this situation is the property vacant? Is anyone living in the home? In my experience, homes that have no one living in them, that are vacant, the sellers are usually a little bit more motivated because a lot of times they have a mortgage on that property, they have taxes on that property, they're looking to get away from that monthly debt, and they do that by selling that property. Now, that's not always going to work. In fact, there's a property here locally, tell you a quick story. A client of mine wants to buy it because he owns the property next door. So for the last 5 to 6 years, I've actually been writing that owner a personal note every month and mailing it to their property. They actually have an off-site address. They don't live at that property. Like I said, it's vacant, and no one's responded to me. They have no interest for whatever reason in selling that property. So even though it's vacant, they're just sitting on that property for one reason or another. So not all vacant properties are going to be motivated to sell, but typically that's the first thing I would look for when I was looking for a property to try to make an offer on to get a deal. The second one we're going to talk about today is homes sitting on the market. Now we're at a time of the year where homes are sitting on the market longer than they were just a couple of months ago. A lot of it has to do with the market turning, affordability being an issue, interest rates being higher, but some of it has to do with seasonality. The market slows during this time of the year and days on the market start to build. But homes that have been sitting on the market for an extended period of time might be an opportunity for you to go in and make an offer on that property and potentially get a deal on that property. And that's going to take me into my next one, and that is looking for properties that have had several price decreases over, say, the last couple of weeks, last couple of months. That shows seller motivation. When a property just sits on the market at one price, to me, it's like the seller is trying to get that price or nothing else. If I don't get this price, I'm not selling. Whereas a seller that continues to adjust to what the market's doing by lowering that price because their home's not selling, that seller is more motivated. And that gives you an opportunity to possibly go in and make an offer on that property. Now, the fourth one I want to talk about today is homes that have fallen out of escrow. If you've seen a property that went into escrow, it was a pending sale, and it's come back on the market for any reason, that might be an opportunity for you to go in and make an offer on that property significantly less than the asking price and actually get a deal. But again, it goes back to the seller motivation, especially if that seller is in contract to buy another property. Maybe they were contingent on selling their property to buy something else. They're in escrow on that up leg and they need to sell their property in order to make that happen. A lot of times, sellers don't want to lose that up leg property, so they're willing to deal with the next buyer that comes in line. Now, this isn't going to work every time, but I want to give you a little story here. I recently sold a property here in Huntington Beach where the buyers of that property were selling their property, right? They were selling a down leg property to buy my property. And they didn't want to lose my property, but the buyers on their side weren't really performing. In fact, the buyers came in and adjusted the asking price on 3 different occasions. They were kind of leveraging their situation. They knew that the seller of the property they were buying, which was the buyer of my property, was really motivated to buy my property. And therefore, they used that as leverage on their side to negotiate repairs, to adjust the asking price, and actually get a deal on that property because they knew they had that seller by the tail, if you will, because the seller wanted to move forward. And in this case, they couldn't do it without selling their property. And the fifth thing I want you to look at are the homes outdated? Are they distressed? Homes that aren't turnkey in this market are sitting a little bit longer than those picture perfect model homes that are staged well, that just show really well. They look like the homes on HGTV. Those homes are still selling at a premium, many times multiple offers, and getting the asking price, if not over the asking price. Whereas the homes that look distressed, look outdated, maybe still have carpet throughout the house, the original cabinets, those homes tend to be sitting a little bit longer. And those are homes that you can probably get a deal on, especially if the seller's motivated. And the last one we're going to talk about today are homes that are in pre-foreclosure. These are homes where the seller has stopped making their payments on their home. It's not yet a foreclosure, but the bank has listed it as a pre-foreclosure. They are, maybe sending out a notice of default on this property because the homeowner's not paying their mortgage. Now, a lot of homeowners out there have equity in their property at the moment, so there's not a huge distress, situation like back in '08 during the housing crash. But if somebody's upside down on their property and they're not selling it, that might be an opportunity for you to go to them to help them get out of trouble, to help them understand what's going to happen. Many of these sellers might not understand how much equity they actually have in that property. And by selling the property to you versus just staying in it and walking away and losing all that equity, they might be able to walk away with some cash. And if you can educate that seller on the process and help them understand the market, you might actually be able to get a deal on that house. Now, earlier in the video, we talked about real estate being local. So there's something I want to point out. I mentioned earlier in the video, the boom markets, Austin, Texas, Boise markets, Nashville, a lot of these markets that went crazy out there, those boom markets, those are markets where you're more likely to get a deal just because there's more property on the market, at least based on what I'm reading out there. But understand, like we said, real estate is local. So if you're in a market that has very little inventory in a neighborhood, you're looking at one, specific community and there's no other listings in there, it might be more difficult to get a deal on a property in that community. Whereas if you're looking at a community or a city or an area that has a ton of real estate on the market, properties just continue to pop up, inventory's continuing to rise, those are markets where you're more likely to get a deal. Because usually lots of homes on the market means more opportunity, where less homes on the market mean less opportunity. Now, before we go over the last thing, I'd like to ask a favor. If you find any value in this video at all, hit that thumbs up. Feel free to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on everything real estate related. And the last thing I want to touch on in today's video is that we're going into a time of year where things naturally slow. The fall winter market, the holiday market. If a home is listed on the market, say between November and the end of the year, chances are that seller is really looking to sell that property, because otherwise they would probably pull it off the market and list it at the beginning of the year when things start to naturally pick up. So if a home is on the market during Thanksgiving, during the Christmas holidays, those are sellers that really want to sell. And so that to me shows motivation, and you can use that motivation in many cases in order to help you get a deal.